Recording in progress.
Ayan. Good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations to you and to your friends who passed the part 1 and part 2 of the June 2023 testing window. No? And please extend our congratulations to them.
And we have 2 passers.
Talaga, sir?
Part 1 naman.
Part 1 po.
Yun yung alam ko na nag-take sa amin, kaya alam kong wasa talaga.
Yes, sir. Congratulations po.
Yeah. Mga taga-Abu Dhabi.
Sir.
So, part 2 naman sila.
Po.
Okay po.
Thank you, sir. And we will continue from slide 77 no last time. So, this topic will focus on job order costing. So, when we talk about job order costing, we understand that this time, instead of focusing on the process, we are going to allocate our costs to a job. So, this is normally used when each item in the company would produce something that is unique, something that is distinct and identifiable from all other products. So the examples that were provided to us here, no, you have your audit firms, your law firms, your shipbuilding companies, so specialized in nature. So this could also include your companies that would produce something that is large, something that is handmade, like a custom furniture maker, or yung mga gumagawa ng high-end na mga jewelry. So a job order costing question is not really different from a standard overhead allocation question. Only that this time, the direct materials and the labor, which are also the same for standard allocation, are assigned directly to your project. But in order for us to price that item properly, the company must allocate the overhead this time to each project. And so, yung direct materials mo and your labor will be charged to jobs instead of process or instead of across cost pools. Now, this time is going to be charged to jobs, which is why here on your screens you see your direct materials and labor going to job 1, 2, and 3. So you charge your direct material and labor cost to each work job as your work is performed. And so for your indirect cost for the manufacturing overhead, still we allocate to job 1, 2, and 3 instead of being directly traced. They are allocated to the job instead of being directly traced to each of the jobs. Yan. So yun yung kanyang isang difference by job. This is what a job order cost sheet would normally look like. I'm sure nakakam across na kayo ng ganito. But essentially, ang nakikita natin dito sa isang cost sheet would be what is the job number. Kailan natin sinimulan yung project. Normally, ito, if we are strict with say for example, the rules and the regulations within the manufacturing company, wala tayong ng items na blank dito. Like, when is the date of completion or estimated date of completion? How many units are we expected to complete? Saang department ba natin? Itong sheet na ito ay saang department natin gagaling? What is the item? So it's going to require you to input information or data about your direct materials, your direct labor, and overhead. And then at the bottom, you see your cost summary. Also as also showing the units shipped, your inventory for that item. So ito is per company job cost sheet. Ayan. So when you measure your direct materials cost, you have, of course, to have a requisite form. Everything, kahit nga pagkuha ka ng supply mo, you are required to fill out a materials requisition form. Normally, this is numbered doon sa kanyang for audit purposes, for trail purposes, and which job requires that material, and see that nag-a-align siya doon sa department na nakalagay doon sa ating cost sheet. So it would include which materials, of course, you are requiring for that job. And so in this example, to sa $116, of course, ipopost nila ito sa ating job cost sheet. So it's simply a matter of recording the items, the labor. This one is for the labor cost. So again, you have a time ticket for those people and involved in the completion or the manufacture of that product. And so it should charge nila siya again for the job. So there's a different one for materials, there's a different one for labor. And see, you are going to post it again on the job cost sheet kung ilang hours ang kanyang na-entail to make that item. Yan. And then we finally go to your overhead. Ito kasi yung pinakapunto ng ating allocation. Ito yung talagang kailangan nating accurate siya. Ina-allocate and depende doon sa ating method selected by the company that would what that method would require. And so in this example, it's going to require 160,000 direct labor hours to meet the coming period production level. So the company would estimate total fixed manufacturing overhead of $200,000 and variable manufacturing overhead cost at 2.75 per direct labor hour. So using ang ating formula where y is equal to a plus bx. So, kasi yung remember from our previous discussion ang ating cost function. So the 640,000 hours coming from your 275 and your 160 would be your total estimated manufacturing overhead na isi-spread natin over the 160,000 direct labor hours. And so your production overhead, that would be your $4 per direct labor hour. And so pag ganun ang pag-estimate mo, just like your materials and your labor, then you also have to include this in your cost sheet. I believe papakita niya ito. So 8 hours and then you have your manufacturing overhead here of 32. And for a total cost of 236. So again, ang focus natin sa ating job order cost accounting will have to be your cost per job. And then it tells you the date completed, units completed. Let's see what does. Then you have, of course, the computation for your unit product cost. Part of allocation would also be service cost allocation. Ito yung may nakikita kayo na ina-allocate from one service department to the other. Or if not, you have multiple users. And there are two methods that are associated with service cost allocation. That is your single rate, dual rate. Sa single rate, we do not separate your fixed cost of service from your variable cost. So in that sense, all of your costs would be put into one cost pool, and then you simply allocate the cost using a single rate. It's a single rate method derived from the name. For the dual rate, you would have to break down your cost into either a variable or a fixed cost. So it would allocate each of your cost pools using a different allocation base. So again, depende doon sa kanyang kind of or the class of costs. So again, that's two methods. You have your single and your dual rate. Yeah. For service department cost allocation, again, you have what you call your intermediate cost center. Sa ating intermediate cost center, the costs from this department are charged to other departments in the organization. Whereas when we say that one cost center is a final cost center, yung the cost of that section or that department or that center is no longer allocated to other cost centers. Final na, dito na lang siya. But if it's an intermediate cost center, the costs in the center are still allocated to other service departments. Yeah. So when we talk about your service and user departments, this is simply an example for your service cost allocation system. This is an example for your service cost allocation where your service departments are normally represented by S1 and S2, being the sections or the departments that would give service. Now, in this example, that would be giving service to user department 1, which is your Hilltop Mine and your Pacific Mine. So makikita niyo yung how they distribute in their their services. So, as an example of your service cost allocation, you have to assume na si Carlisle has two service departments. You have your information systems, that is S1, and you have your administration, that's S2. And so we also assume that Carlisle has two user departments nga, si P1 which is Hilltop and then P2 which is Pacific. And so it provides services to S2, P1 and P2, and S2 provides services to S1, P1 and P2. Yeah. So if a company chooses to allocate the costs of multiple service departments, like for example, your accounting, finance, general, HR, there are three methods. You have the direct, the step, and the reciprocal. The difference is that how they treat the services provided from one service to the other. So let's see how they differ from one another. So this is the basic data for Carlisle. So if you look at this table, there's the cost allocation base for 800,000 cost is your S1 for your computer hours. So the question is, why are computer hours your allocation base? So kasi it becomes your allocation base because the cost driver in this example would be your computer hours. Basing on the same example, you can see that S1 provides a total of 200,000 computer hours to the other departments. S2 also, you would see, uses half of the hours. And P1 and P2 use 10% and 40% respectively of those hours. So we would also have to allocate the cost of O, diba, yung S2. So the cost driver for the 5 million cost of S2 naman is the number of employees. So if we look at the number of employees there, of the 10,000 employees in departments other than S2, 2,000 are in S1, 5,000 are in, or half are in P1, and the remaining 3,000, they are also in P2. So now we have to allocate the cost of these two service departments or intermediate cost centers to the two final cost centers and the production departments. So for the direct method, you are going to ignore yung transfer of services that are provided between the two service departments. So direct siya kung ano lang P1 and P2 only. The cost of your service departments are allocated directly and only to the production departments and not the service departments. So the cost of the different service departments may be allocated to your production departments using your different allocation bases. And in this example, that was the computer hours and the number of employees. Sometimes in other examples, like here, your cafeteria costs may be allocated on the number of people. And if you talk about advertising department costs, they may be allocated on the level of sales. So for the direct method, the direct method of the service department cost allocation charges costs of service departments to user departments. Yan nga, if you look at it, there's no allocation between S1 and S2. So in other words, the costs are charged only to the final cost centers. So in the case of Carlisle, that is only P1 and P2, S2 giving service to P1 and P2. So continue natin yung computation for the cost allocation. So using the allocation percentages, your P1 is allocated 160,000 at the table below of S1. That's 20%. And then 3,125,000 of S2 cost. Saan nakuha yung 20%? Now, if you look at the additional computation below, we have 20,000 hours, remember from our first slide, plus the 80,000 hours. So that's 20,000 hours divided by 100 hours. So that's 20%. That's your cost driver. And then for administration, the number of employees naman, for a total of 8,000 employees yun, di ba? So that's 5,000 employees over 8,000, giving you 62.5%. Para makuha mo yung allocated to ng information systems, that would be 20% of 800,000. Yun ang kakay, yung top 9. And then for the succeeding items, no, P2 is allocated $640,000 of S1 costs and $1,875,000 of S2 costs. So if you look at the entire cost of $5,800,000 of the service departments, this is how they are going to be allocated to your production or final cost centers. The step method, on the other hand, we take into account some of the services that are provided to other services. And then, pag naibigay mo yung cost na yon, na share ng iyong service department, we allocate the cost of service to the other department. So it tells you that a popular way, but again, this is not the only way, there's 3 methods to determine the order according to the percentage of each department services that are provided to other service department. So, ang titignan mo yung percentage. So, that department that uses or that provides the highest percentage of its services to the other service departments first is allocated first. Tapos susunod na yung all others. So, magiging priority mo sa ranking would be the provision of services. Kung sino yung nagbibigay ng pinakamataas na highest percentage of services to other service departments would have to allocate the cost first. So the cost of the service department that provides the second highest percentage of its services to other service departments are then allocated. So these costs are allocated to the second department, include, of course, the allocated cost and then the cost of that department where you had allocated. Now, ang sinasabi niya sa'yo, pag inallocate mo na siya sa first service department, hindi mo na siya dapat i-charge back. So one service department has had its cost allocated, and pag na-allocate mo na to, hindi mo siya ibabalik to other service departments. So that's one of the differences from direct method. So, okay, ito yung itsura nung ano. Remember that in direct method, wala tayong bigayan ng service between your service departments. However, for the step method, you can from S1 to S2. However, you cannot transfer costs from S2 to S1. You have to allocate all of the cost of S1 to S2 and to the final cost departments. Walang babalik sa S1. That's why it's a step method. So, that's one of the differences. If it's reciprocal, pwede kang magbalik. It's service department 1 to S2 and then you allocate. So, in this example, you see costs coming in from from S1 to S2, and then S1 cost allocated to P1 and P2 respectively. And then, yung lahat naman ng cost ni Service Department 2 ay i-allocate mo lang to P1 and P2. Pipiliin mo siya how. Sinong may pinakamataas na percentage of provision of the service, siya ang cost na mauunang i-allocate. So, hindi siya laging pauna si S1. No? So, kung sino yung may pinakamalaking percentage of service provision. So, if you look at this allocation, no, yung direct cost niya, so that's direct cost of 800,000 and 5 million no, for S2. So, S2 is going to receive 50% no, of the allocation of S1 cost. Why? Kasi siya yung gumagamit ng 50%. And because S2 uses 50% of the services provided to all your departments, they would receive by receiving an allocation. So in this case, ito yung ating S2, P1 and P2. Okay. So again, from S1, P1 will receive 10% of the allocation and P2, 40% of the allocation of S1. So that's $800,000. S1, on the other hand, is not going to receive any of the allocation of S2's cost kasi nga, S1 costs have already been allocated. Sa step method, we do not reallocate to the service department. So with that said, your production department 1 and 2 will receive 62.5% and 37.5% respectively. If you look at the calculation below the table, again, you have to rely on your cost drivers, your computer hours, and your number of employees. So what are the costs? What costs are to be allocated from S2? So that would be your 5 million of your direct costs plus the indirect costs that are allocated coming from S1 and S2. And so let's look at what it means, no? Itong ating 10%, 40%, 62.5%, and the 37.5%. Basta tandaan ninyo, yung basis would be the highest no, percentage ng service provision, and then you're going to allocate this based on the cost drivers. Yan. So if we do the computation based on those percentages, no, ito na yung kanyang itsura. So S1's 800,000 was allocated in the following manner. So meron kang 400 S2, and then you have 80,000 to P1, and then you allocate it to 320,000 to P2. So that's yung 400,000 is coming from 50% sa ating other table. And then for P1, that was of course 10%, and then for P2 is 40% of 800,000. And then once you have allocated the entire 800,000 to S2 and all the others, wala ka nang ibabalik sa kanya. Ang i-allocate mo naman this time will be the cost of S2. Tama. Yan. If you see there, the 5,400,000 will be allocated now to P1 and P2. And based on the cost drivers, we are going to allocate 62.5% of the 5.4 million pesos to P1 dollars. And then 37.5% of the 5.4 million will go to P2. So the $5,800 of service cost departments will ultimately allocated to your production departments. Ito yung mag-highlight doon sa ating difference. No? You allocate cost to S2, but you do not allocate cost back to S1. So pag na-allocate mo na yung may pinakamataas na percentage of service provision, then that section or that department can then allocate all of its cost to your production. Sa direct method, walang ganun. Allocate mo sila. Ayan. Next. Ayan. So the step method allocates some service department cost to other service departments. Once your allocation is made from a service department to another, again, no further allocations are made back to that service department. Generally, you allocate in order of proportion of services provided to other service departments. Because we want to allocate the cost based on the usage or based on our cost drivers. The third method would be your reciprocal method. So what happens under your reciprocal method? You recognize all of the services that are provided to the other service departments. And so it's going to use multiple equations kasi nga you already give back to the others. Once we have supplied yung ating information with these equations, then the answer is how much you will allocate to all of the other departments, including other service departments. Theoretically, this is the correct method kasi nga your service departments will service each other really. So however, a company will need to balance this additional cost required doing this against the benefits that are received. So depende doon sa ating methods, but one of the considerations of course would be your cost, always your cost benefit analysis, because it might be accurate, but the cost of doing this method or performing this method might be too expensive and might be too expensive and burdensome for the company instead of using a cheaper siguro but appropriate allocation method. And so without further ado, you're going to see here that your service department 1 will allocate to service department 2, and your service department 2 will allocate to service department 1, and they will consequently, each of them will distribute to user department P1 or user department P2. And so mag-allocate ka na to other service departments. So this can actually be easily accomplished manually when only 2 service departments exist. So, but again, it is going to require the use of simultaneous equations to allocate using your reciprocal method. So in reality, sometimes there's more than 2 service departments. Kaya nga nagiging issue din dito sometimes yung the use of the method because it's expensive. So how do you do the reciprocal method? You write the cost of each service department in the equation form, where your total service department cost will be equivalent to your direct cost of the service department plus the costs that will be allocated to you. So yung cost mo on your own, and then costs allocated to you. So of course, we're going to solve your equation simultaneously. So for example, in our Carlisle company, your total service department cost for S1, sabi niya, the direct cost of S1 is 800,000. And you allocate 20% of your cost to S2. So that's your first equation. The second equation would be S2 is equivalent to the direct cost of the service department, which is 5 million. And you allocate 50% of that to S1. So mapapansin niyo, we need to do the algebraic method because of the provision of the services from one service department to the other as represented by your S2, S1 sa ating formula. Yan. So, yeah. So first you substitute the first equation into the second equation. So that's effectively 5 million plus 50% of S1. So S1 is equivalent to $800,000 plus 0.20 S2. Nakaraniwan ng nagkakamali dito would be the mathematical equation itself. Kasi dapat, pagka naka-parenthesis siya, you distribute it to the items in the parenthesis first. Kaya itong 800,000 is 50%, and then 50% of 0.20 is 0.10. Yan. So that's 5 million plus $400,000 plus 0.10 S2. And when you simplify, your S2 then becomes 6 million. Now when you substitute the value of S2 back into the first equation, so that's S1 is equal to 800,000 plus 0.20 times 6 million. And then the service department cost for S1 would then be 2 million. Mag-ingat tayo dito sa ating pag-transpose and sa ating pag-multiply. Usually doon kasi nagkakalituhan. And so, cost allocation, again, we look at the percentage of allocation. So you have to remember that all of your departments are getting an allocation now. So when we determine the percent to allocate, you must use all the departments' usage in the denominator. So if we recall from the previous slide that P1 and P2 use what? 10% and 40% respectively. And so it's also 50% and 30% for S2. So now we will allocate $20 million S1 cost papunta kay P2, P1 and P2 using 10% and 40%. And your 6 million total cost from S2 would be allocated to P1 and P2 using this time 50% and 30%. Again, take note of our cost drivers, which are your number of hours in your employees. So if we use those percentages to allocate, ito yung kanyang magiging itsura. The result is that all of your 5,800,000 service costs coming from S1 and S2 have been allocated to the final cost centers P1 and P2. So that's 3.2 million for P2 and then for P1, and then for P2 that's 2.6 million. But if you look at your service department cost, there's no cost remaining in either of them. So ang ibig sabihin nun, all of your direct and indirect costs from your service departments have been successfully allocated to your production departments. This is a comparison for the three methods. So you have your direct, your step, and the reciprocal. And so again, which method would be appropriate? Certainly, when you look at these three, the reciprocal method is the most accurate, but management must have weigh the costs and benefits that are associated with using the different methods. So you see, for the direct method, ang cost naman still, the total would still be the same. However, based on whichever method, pinakamataas yung kay step in terms of P1. However, mas mataas ang cost na ma-allocate kay Pacific Mine or P2 under the direct method. Pinaka-accurate daw ang ating reciprocal, but again, depende sa ating kakayahan industry or ng ating business to implement the reciprocal method. So again, you must weigh the cost and benefits associated with using each. For purposes of your multiple choice questions, they have to tell you which method. Hindi pa naman ako nakakita nung paatras, yung like binigay nila how much cost, and then you have to compute for ganun. Hindi pa naman. Usually talagang ang question dito would be how much cost is allocated to your production departments using these methods. Wala pa akong nakitang to complicated na mag-start ka bottom up. Yeah. This is a summary. So the reciprocal method would recognize all services that were provided by your service departments. Yeah. So it accounts for all of your cost flows among service departments. So it requires a simultaneous equation solution. So substitution, yung nanap ng term kanina. Substitution into your equations. Yeah. So this is section B of your cost management. This is 20% of your part 1 exam. And this talks about operational efficiency and business process performance. So ito, wala na ito sa cost allocation, but this is an project evaluation. So dito natin makikita yung concepts ng just-in-time, ng Kanban, mga ganun. So natatapos na natin itong first 6 bullets ninyo, and then we have operational efficiency and business performance. Yan. So I remember life cycle costing being one of the questions that were asked during my essay part of the question in part 1. Yeah. It asked for a definition of what life cycle costing is, and then what is life cycle costing, what would be an example of life cycle costing, ganun. So what I did was to define it, and then ginawan ko pa siya ng a graphical presentation from birth to the end of life, and then to discuss all of the points of the life noong item na yun, or kung hindi siya item, the production. And so after that, I presented an example. I think I gave to the essay portion. So at any rate, in life cycle costing, a company does not really determine the production cost in the sense that on a per unit basis, kasi the life cycle costing is more of a long-term tool to view the cost of your production. So the life cycle costing would actually now include costs like your research and development. So diba, in accounting, you say that your research and development costs are not capitalizable if you bought it. Ganun. May mga conditions siya. But for managerial accounting, or for purposes of taking your CMA exams, your research and development, your marketing, your development, your after-sales costs, and other costs that are associated with this product during its entire life cycle would be part of your life cycle costing. So hindi lang siya accounting value. At least we're talking about the economic value to that item. And so the longer-term view is of particular importance when the product has significant R&D costs and other non-production costs such as after-sales service costs. Kasi normally, hindi siya the cost is not included doon sa ating per unit or per item, or sa parang in-expense na lang siya kasi parang we cannot do away with this. But for purposes of life cycle costing, we have to look into the impact ng mga costs na ito, because we want to know which costs we can minimize, which costs we can spend for the product to be profitable over its life. So in that sense, how much are we recovering itong mga costs na nasuspend natin with the revenue that we are generating from these products. Yan. So life cycle costing is different versus your other costing method kasi nga, it treats pre-production and after-sales cost as your product costs. And so other methods see this cost as expense, as period expenses that are expensed as incurred. And normally, hindi nga siya naisasama doon sa ating analysis. So under other methods, these pre-production and after-sale costs are not taken into account to determine the profitability of a product or a product line. And so all of the costs in the life cycle of a company can be broken down into three categories. Meron yung upstream, which is related to your pre-production cost or before production. You have your manufacturing cost, which would be related to during the production. And then you have your downstream cost or your after-sale costs or after production. So yun yung category ng ating pag-breakdown ng cost. Upstream, pre-production, manufacturing cost, which is during the production, and then downstream, which is after production. And accruing life cycle costs. So for pre-production, that's R&D and the design, because we're still making it. Then we have the manufacturing, which is the production process. And then for downstream or after production, that's marketing, distribution, and after sales for customer service. So normally, nagtatanungin nila kung ano yung mga activities that would be included in your pre-production or upstream. That's generally R&D and design. And for downstream, marketing and distribution, selling, and customer service. And product life, this is from conception, from birth to death, from conception to abandonment. And so the revenue producing life, this is the time that a product will generate revenue for the company. So pag consumable life, so these are just terms, no? Pag na-encounter nyo yung consumable life, this is simply the length of time that a product would serve the need of the cost. So revenue would be yung time na itong product na to ay mag-generate ng revenue for our business. There are three basic views of the product life cycle: marketing, production, and consumable. Yan. Please take note, no? Ano lang naman to, they're going to ask you perhaps the definition, or you can add ang concept na ito if they ask it if they ask life cycle costing in your essay question. There are three basic views to the product life cycle, which is your marketing, production, and consumable. Ito, I took one of these when in the essay portion. Yan. Introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. So you can also like input here your pre-production, di ba? Yung R&D and the design, which could be even before or already incurred even before the introduction or all throughout the introduction process, and then towards the decline, or even at maturity because you're already selling, and you also have after sales already. Actually dito sa part from starting from growth and maturity, di ba? Kasi pag nakabenta ka, dito naman meron ka ng sales. So dito, we should already consider the cost of marketing, the cost of distribution, the cost of after sales. So hindi lang siya dito sa decline. So this is the general pattern of product life under your marketing viewpoint. Yeah. For the production viewpoint, so you have here the life cycle cost percentage, which is of course 100%. And then makikita nyo sa kanyang x-axis, it tells you we do research now. We do research 25% of the time. Yeah. We do planning after that. So we progression from research, there's planning, and then there's design, there's the testing, there's production, hanggang sa distribute mo siya. That's logistics. So this time, the basis for the product life cycle would be from the start of the life of your product up until ma-distribute mo siya sa iyong customer or end user, which is why you see on the y-axis that it's 100% life cycle cost, no? Until it's ready for use, as opposed to your marketing na introduction, growth, maturity, and decline, which talks about your market or which talks about your item. Ito naman, production. And then the typical relationships of product cycle viewpoint. So at the introduction stage, no, normally dahil pinapakilala pa lang siya, of course we can expect that the sales would be low. Pero habang tumatagal in the growth maturity, mas mabilis ang ating sales, mas dumadami siya. And then at maturity, it would slowly near its peak na posibleng na saturate na yung market, or the item that you are selling is not something that is bought every day. Ganun. So hindi talaga siya consumable in that sense. And then for decline, of course, it's the demand for it is going to be declining, and so we can attribute the low sales to that happening. In the production life cycle, their expenses like your R&D, your PPE, your advertising and service. Now, when we look at it from a marketing point of view, yung introduction, growth, and maturity, you can see that at the beginning, meron siyang high at introduction, and also be moderate at during growth. The instances that, however, that sa introduction, it's moderate. Kasi depende siya doon sa klase ng item. Could also be high during the growth. At sa maturity, ay moderate siya. Sa decline, of course, is going to be low. Kasi sometimes, full ang ating efforts for R&D before we start or before we introduce the product into the market. Low ang PPE or the use of your PPE expenses on the introduction kasi we do not expect generation ng maraming products dito. Kasi sometimes, because often at the introduction stage, hindi pa ganun karami yung kailangan natin produce because we are simply starting out with that product. We are introducing the product. We are looking for our niche in the market. Yeah. Advertising, however, would sometimes be moderate to high during the introduction phase. Depende doon sa ating magiging strategy. But more often, we want to get word out about this product, so we would spend more for advertising. Hanggang sa progression ng life ng ating product, nagdi-decline na siya towards the end of the life of the product. Kasi nga, either papalitan natin to ng bagong product or totally i-eliminate na natin yung product. So it goes, this is also the same for the service or the after sales or the service of your item or the product during the introduction. It is low. So habang dumadami ating benta, madami din ang ating kailangan i-generate na service. Of course, the maturity, because this is the peak, then we can expect that this is also high service requirement. Habang nawawala siya or nagde-decline ng demand, it becomes low also. For the consumable life cycle, we look at the attributes of what customers would value. So you have your customer type, performance sensitivity, price sensitivity, and competition. So if you look at the customer type, usually yung mga susubok ng bagong products would be the ones you call your innovators now, because they either make your product a benchmark or they're going to make your benchmark, or they're going to create something new out of that product, or gusto nilang sila ang spearhead ng something new also, and so they're going to look at what is already being offered in the market that are just starting out, and what can we produce that can complement that or compete with it. Kaya dito sa ating customer type, ang sabi niya ay and for the growth, we have mass market, of course, because tumataas ng demand. That's the expectation. For maturity, mass market, and this is where you require differentiation as one of your strategies in long-term strategic planning. Isa to sa mga steps natin. And then you have your decline or your laggards. For performance sensitivity, of course, it's high. It's high for introduction up until maturity. Because if you look at the type of customer that you have, we are always looking for quality performance. Price sensitivity, mababa siya dito sa ating introduction because we are hindi sa atin priority pa muna yung pagpababa ng presyo or getting the price which is right, but we want to get this product out into the market. So normally nagkakaroon tayo dito ng mga discount or low na price, yung para lang mailagay mo siya sa shelves, no? This item should be put in the market. So it's moderate. When it starts to grow, it becomes high until it reaches its maturity, and again, in the decline period, this becomes moderate. For competition, usually pag una, at the start or the introduction phase, you have none or you have a little. So it's going to grow once na nakita nila. Usually, magkakaroon ng lilipat yan eh. Makikita nila na profitable yung product mo, and so they're going to, okay, let's make the same product or let's make a little innovation and then introduce it as a new product. So competition would start to grow. Sa maturity, high. Lalo na pag ang basis is profitability at nakita nga nila that your item is profitable, or they'll be able to see opportunity, like they could complement, they could make another product because of it. And then for the decline, it's going to be low kasi either magta-transfer na sila sa ibang market or ibang industry. So wala ka ng competition. Attributes, your profits are negligible to loss. Again, we are simply starting out. For the growth, we can see peak levels here. Habang nakikilala, dumadami ang demand. For maturity, moderate to high. And for the decline, we no longer expect as much profit as in the previous periods kasi nga, nagdi-decline din ang ad. Yeah. I hope they don't ask you this, but if they do, well, they're simply going to ask you of the relationship, perhaps describe. Pero, yeah, just describe the section. And this is one of your business process performance systems, your just-in-time concept. So this is based on the concept or the philosophy that would combine your purchasing, production, and inventory into one control function. And as in, by the name just-in-time, is going to reduce your inventory level na hinahawakan ng ating company. So your inventory is there as you are going to your production. So with a lower level of inventory, then we can expect that the carrying cost would also be low. Sometimes the just-in-time would eliminate the use of many storage spaces or warehouses, thereby reducing the cost of your manufacturing or the cost of your production. And so the core of your just-in-time is that you're not going to produce this item until it is needed in the next assembly. So just to highlight that attribute, the JIT is really a push system rather than the JIT system is really a pull system rather than a push. Kasi nga, nothing is produced until kailangan siya sa assembly. So, before na magkaroon ka ng need sa assembly, kailangan meron mo ng customer that demanded for the product. Itong just-in-time systems ay one of the tools where you can reduce yung carrying cost. So when you implement JIT, again, you minimize inventory storage, and then the factory must be reported to yes, your JIT is used in lean production. So each of your workers would essentially, ang assumption is that your employees or your workers would know how to operate all of the machines at pwede nilang i-operate yung mga tasks within the different sections or within the different departments. So when they are able to do that, it lessens yung downtime resulting from breakdowns or employee absences, because kahit na may absent, merong marunong. So they can do the task, which is why this one would highlight yung lean production. Yan. Because the JIT levels are kept low in your JIT system, and what this also highlights would be the kind of relationship that you have with your suppliers. So you must make certain, or you must assure that your suppliers would be able to make this frequent deliveries to you in smaller amounts. Ang mahirap kasi, if you do not have a good relationship with your supplier, posibleng hindi ka na dalahan required mo to make your production. And so, it's also critical that your inventory be of the required quality. Kasi nga, para maiwasan natin yung wala kang buffer. Kasi wala kang buffer, di ba? Wala kang pagkukunan ng item, nagkaroon ka ng emergency or biglang tumami or biglang meron kang one-time order, or gano'n. And so because there are no extras to use in a place of defective units, you must always ensure that the quality of the items that are delivered to you are up to your standards. And please take note that although a cost reduction strategy focused on the elimination of waste is universally applicable, JIT implementation is not appropriate for your high-mix manufacturing environments. Kasi nga, can have thousands of products and dozens of work centers. So pag hindi mo na manage well under your JIT, kakaroon ka ng bottleneck in other work centers. Ayan. So this would simply talk about plant layout pattern versus your JIT. So ito yung traditional. So product A and product B would go to the 3 product departments. So department 1, department 2, and department 3 until you arrive to the finished product. In comparison to your JIT manufacturing layout, ang tinitingnan kasi nila dito is how you can also save the time and how you can also save the space. So you have product A, lathe, grinder, and welding to up until it becomes a finished product. It's one complete set. And then for the cell B, it's the same. You have your lathe, your grinder, and then your welding, and then a finished product B. So hindi siya the progression is quite different. Hindi siya straight. It is the entire process can be found in one cell. Ito nakaspread siya over 3. Kanban is a term that is used for a visual record. So ano ang nakalagay lang naman doon sa Kanban, no? Bilisan natin ang konti dito. Doon sa Kanban mo, these are essentially cards, no, or tickets. Ang unang gumamit nito was Toyota in 1960. Actually, madaming na-spearhead ang Toyota in terms of managerial strategies. So, at the core of your Kanban concept is that the supplier would deliver your materials or your requirement to the production line as it is needed. So, nangyayari, it is the Kanban or the ticket signals yung need mo for that item. And so, because it is an on-need basis, again, it eliminates the storage in the production area. And so, this chain process where your orders flow from one process to another, so pull system. So the production of the components is pulled to the production line rather than being pushed. Ang push kasi yung meron ng items na available kahit na hindi mo kailangan gumawa. So it should be mentioned that Kanban can go beyond using simple just-in-time technique because it can support yung ating industrial engineering, HR, management. Ayan. So if you are familiar with this, to do, in progress, and plan. So depende kasi doon sa strategy ng ating business o ng ating company. We also have MRP. So, pag MRP, kailangan mo gumamit ng computer software. So, your business is already using this kasi dependent ka doon sa system in terms of ordering and scheduling of your the arrival of your materials required for production. So, dependent demand is a concept. Demand for items that are components or sub-assemblies that are used in production of used or finished goods. So this demand is dependent upon the demand of your finished goods. In contrast to your just-in-time, the push, ito naman, yung just-in-time mo is a pull, and the MRP or the materials requirement planning will be a push inventory system, where your finished goods are manufactured for inventory. So may inventaryo ka talaga, hindi mo siya ginagawa habang or as your demand comes in. So MRP makes it possible to have the materials available when they are needed and where they are needed. When demand forecasts are made by the sales group, so the MRP software will break out the finished products to be produced into the required components. So they're going to determine yung total quantities na kailangan mo i-order for each component. Which is why dito niyo rin makikita yung concept ng ating safety stocks. So there's always available information about which component is on hand. What are the inventory, lead times, no? And other parameters that can be input into the system or into the software. And once these parameters, these quantities, requirements have been worked out, then they are required to pay to cash for the parts that they are planned for. So your MRP can be used to reduce your cash needed by the organization. Isa din to sa tools for your planning sa cash budgeting. So again, this would of course not improve your profitability and ROI as well as the use of your cash. If you can take advantage of short-term investment opportunities with the available cash coming from the use of an MRP. So medyo mahaba no yung kanyang page. So from MRP, of course you have your purchase order down to the inventory, your bill of materials, factory orders, inventory to your sales. And all of this information, no, kailangan available to for your MRP to be, for your MRP to work really well. So kailangan mo ng demand forecast. So these are the components no, for the orders under MRP. You have your demand forecast for the finished goods. You have to have a bill of materials. Sa bill of materials, just like your job cost sheet, pag bill of materials, it gives all of the materials, yung components, and the sub-assemblies that the product requires. So you also have there your quantities of the materials, the components, the finished products, and inventory presently on hand. Although our MRP is a computer system, it also is important to know how your software works. Para alam mo kung ano yung expected na output. Para alam mo kung tama yung pag-process ng ating software. Kung hindi man, then perhaps there is something that we need to fix with our parameters so that you would know how to troubleshoot your problems. Outsourcing, you would outsource. No? You would get the service from an external company. Normally, ginagawa natin ang outsourcing kasi wala tayong expertise dito. Or, mag-outsource tayo kasi mas mura. Merong specialized na business na gumagawa ng service na to at tayo wala. Or, we have other opportunities para sana sa service na yun, iba na lang yung gagawin instead. Or kasi mas mura na kunin natin or i-outsource natin siya from third. Or so by outsourcing a certain function to a specialist, na your management can free up resources within the company so that these resources can be used for other relevant operations in the company. Again, it may also be cheaper. Yeah. One of the disadvantages of outsourcing, really, the questions before was about the quality. Sabi nila, when you outsource something, then you lose quality control kasi wala ka ng hand doon sa how the third party will provide the service. But remember that with the delivery of these services that we have outsourced, we can include it doon sa ating agreements that usually naman gano'n, di ba, we demand for this kind of quality from our suppliers. And of course, if they do not need that, then nagkakaroon tayo ng hindi nagiging magandang relationship natin. The tendency is that we look for others. But now, today, malakas ang industry doon sa ating outsourcing. Number one, because of the expertise, because of cheaper labor, and again, because of the cheaper cost. But as a buyer or as the outsourcing company, then we would be able to include yung ano ba yung ating requirements for or our standards for before we call that service quality service. So yan, pwede mo ring ibibigay mo yung qualifications mo sa servicing company para hindi ka mawalan ng control doon sa quality. If it's not of quality, of course may have an option to reject yung kanyang binibigay sa yung service. We have the theory of constraints that this talks about the limitations in our resources. So, ang constraints is something that would prevent you sa limitation. So, if you want to improve profitability, you have to identify any constraints and you focus on measuring these, doing your variance analysis. No? You link the theory of constraints and your measurements directly to performance. Like, how does it affect our net profit? Does it affect our return on investment? How does it affect our cash flow? And so, this technique improves na yung speed in manufacturing kasi nga, it would increase your throughput contribution. The theory of constraints likewise decreases your investments and your operating costs. Because once you have identified the constraints, no, then you will be able to troubleshoot that area. Makakapag-focus ka doon. Either it's going to be totally eliminated, or if not, it's going to be improved. So overall, it's an improvement to your operation. And so you have theory of constraints, terms and concepts. You have the throughput, which is simply product is produced and shipped. Yung throughput time, the time between the receipt of the customer's order up until you ship it to your customer. Your throughput contribution is simply your revenue minus your total variable cost for a given period of time. Essentially, this is the amount that is earned for the product produced and shipped during 1 hour, 1 day, 1 month, and all other bases. The theory of constraints assumes that operating costs are fixed costs because it regards them as difficult to change in the short. Operating costs would be the same. They are equal to all of your operating costs other than direct materials and any other strictly variable costs. Inventory costs under your theory of constraints are limited to costs that are strictly variable. We know this also as super variable. Usually, ang inventory cost natin dito ang yung direct materials. So, all other costs, no, even your direct labor, are considered operating or fixed costs. So under theory of constraints, again, your tinatawag siyang super variable. Yung inventory cost mo is strictly variable at ito ay only for direct materials. Under theory of constraints, your investments would be the sum of your costs in direct materials, in work in process, and finished goods, your R&D, and the cost of equipment or your people. This is the drum buffer rope system. Once you have identified the constraint, it's the one that's going to signal yung pagkuha mo sa iyong production. The buffer would serve to fulfill yung temporary lang no, nakapagkukulang or kakulangan sa iyong production until after na ma-fulfill mo yung buong demand. Bottlenecks and drum buffer rope system. So the drum would mark na kailangan na natin to. The application of the TOC is called the drum buffer rope. The bottleneck is the constraint. So it has the smallest amount of capacity relative to its load and therefore the slowest part. Your DBR, this is used to resolve conflict, having enough work in the system to make sure that the bottleneck keeps running while at the same time limiting the amount of work in process inventory build-up. Kaya nga, again, start siya no, doon sa constraint na magmamark na doon sa drum to signal kanya. Hindi. Yan. The drum is the bottleneck or the constraint because it provides the beat. So in order to protect the throughput of the entire factory, the bottleneck or the drum must be protected from running out of materials process. You have the buffer or your safety stock. Hindi siya safety stock. This is the minimum level of work in process provided as protection against delay. So the rope is the schedule for releasing your materials to the floor to begin processing, and so that they will reach the drum just the right time. The rope would limit the amount of inventory in the system para hindi ka mag-over ng production. So again, the material will be released only at the rate that the drum has been eaten. The drum can consume and the rope keeps it from being released too soon. So when you manage the bottleneck in the TOC, you have to determine kung ano yung limitation and how it impacts your throughput contribution in the system. So once you have identified that constraint or that limitation, you have to calculate the best use of the bottleneck. Why? Because you want to identify the maximized contribution. So ginagawa natin yung maximization ng flow by using the drum buffer rope system. So hindi siya drop of all products all at once, but it will depend on the beat of your drum. So increase the production capabilities of the bottleneck by adding capacity is also one of the solutions for your constraints. And then if you analyze the system to see if there are improvements to make through redesigning or reordering or re-engineering. Yan. So again, yung feedback kasi para magkailangan mo magkaroon ng assessment for you to be able to see kung ano yung mga dapat mong baguhin doon sa production system, and all of those would come from feedback. And finally, we go to your business process performance. Ito yung ating value chain. So literally, what activity would add value to your product or business. So for transforming inputs into the outputs that your customers would value. So literally, business functions, primary activities or business functions that would add value to a product or service would be your research and development, your production, marketing, sales and distribution, and your customer service. So your support activities, kasama dito yung infra, your information systems and materials management and human resources. For your MCQs, usually tatanungin lang naman for you to identify which activities are primary, or which of the following is an example of a primary activity, or which of the following is the support activity. So tandaan for the primary activities or business functions, this should add value doon sa product. The value chain analysis helps an organization gain competitive advantage by identifying what activities add value to the customer. So the organization can increase the related benefits of value-added activities and to reduce the non-value-added activities. Remember from the last discussion, we mentioned yung crashing of activities. So once you have identified kung ano yung mga non-value-added, then you can focus your resources to other parts of the operations where they can add value. So there are 3 steps in the value chain analysis. One is to identify yung activities that add value to your end product. The second is to identify the cost driver for each of your activities. And the third is to use itong increasing the value to the customer, or increasing your value-adding activities and reducing the cost of production. Ito yung ginagamit natin na methods to build competitive advantage. Either dagdagan mo ng features na mag-add value to the customer, which would make your customer want to buy your product, or babaan mo yung cost of production para kaya mo din i-value price. Porter's value chain method, so your primary activities. So depende kasi doon sa model ginagamit mo, but generally ang focus ng ating value chain model would be those processes that are value added. So kay Porter, ang primary activities niya ay 5. You have inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, you have marketing and sales, and service. For support activities, this would include your firm infrastructure, procurement, HRM, and technology, all of which are arrowed to your profit. So itong mga to, they should be analyzed together. Pwede rin naman siyang separately, but when you make your interpretation, it should be analyzed together, or a combination of your primary activities and support activities. Because again, at the end of the day, we want to look into the activities that would actually add. Alisin natin or bawasan natin those activities that foreseen as non-value adding, and to use itong mga resources natin instead doon sa mga processes or activities that actually add value and that the customers would want to do. Business process engineering, ito is instead of top-down, this is bottom-up. No? Meron ng product, tapos, or meron ng service, or meron ng product, kakalasin mo. Titignan mo how it works. It's the other way around. So, in terms of a process, the organization would identify kung ano yung kanyang competitive advantage over the others. So, for it to be able to do that, kailangan alam niya kung ano yung, saan siya magaling, ano yung competencies niya. And so, when you are able to identify these competencies, then they're able to understand why they are successful, what makes them a success. So, ito yung mga competitive advantages natin. And then, second step is to determine what processes it uses in its efforts to generate a product or service. And so, once you have identified your competencies, the next step is to determine yung value that each process could contribute to our product. So, etong step number 2 natin can uncover low value processes, and when we find that they are low value and they can be eliminated without heavily disrupting yung ating process, then we can discard, we can modify. So depending, it's not always discard, but we can modify or redefine or re-engineer yung ating process na ito. But kung hindi naman talaga siya kailangan, then we can ultimately remove it from the process. Yan. So we have initiating change, you process the diagnosis, you process the redesign of that product, you reconstruct, you have process monitoring, and you envision a new process. And so if you see, it is a cycle kasi hindi siya tumitigil once that you are able to envision a new process. And once you look into the improvement or the value-adding portion or the value-adding activities, you will always want basis. As a basis for initiating change would be feedback coming from the actual outputs of the process. Benchmarking as a tool in business process performance is you look at how other firms, being experts in that field, to identify and adopt yung kanilang best practices. And so in a sense, you measure yung sarili mo organization against the other organizations who produce perhaps the same industry. Pero it's not always in the same industry kasi pwede rin na yung practices could be applied to you even if it's in a different industry. So if you see benchmarking, you simply measure your organization against product, services, and practices that of the most efficient on global competitors. But also take note that your competitors are not only the ones in the same industry as I mentioned earlier. They could also come from other industries. And so with benchmarking, you would have to continuously strive to improve or imitate the performance of the best companies in the world. But sometimes you have to move away from the imitation but to make that practice your own. Kasi nga, the culture and the practice may not per se be applicable to you. So you have to modify it in such a way that it applies to your circumstances. And by meeting itong higher standards na to, the organization is expected to create competitive advantage over your competition. And so, how do we do benchmarking? Number 1, we follow or we identify the critical success factors for the business and the processes to benchmark. Ano ba yung gusto nating i-benchmark? Diba? Ano ba yung mga competencies natin? So, the critical success factors are the aspects of the company's business that are essential to your competitive advantage. So normally, we would create these teams to do best practice analysis. Of course, when you do your analysis, kailangan ito ay documented. So we document the processes that are used in performing the firm's critical success factors activities. So This team will also have to identify which areas need improvement and how they are going to improve it. So normally, ginagamit nila yung experience noong kanilang benchmark na company. Or can also be from their own experience. We also have your activity-based management, which essentially means performing value chain analysis and business process engineering. So coming from the title itself, yung activity-based management would use yung activity analysis and activity-based costing data to improve your products and services. So yung activity-based management mo, they are divided into either operational and strategic. Pag sinabi mo operational activity-based management, you use ABC data, whether that is cost or whether that is activity, to improve efficiency. In contrast, if you say activity-based or strategic activity-based management, you use ABC data to make strategic decisions about what products to offer and what activities to use in the provision of those products and services. Okay. Ang Kaizen would simply mean continuous improvement. It implies continuous improvement. So if you say Kaizen, it's not one big improvement, but usually it's an increment of improvement. So pag increment siya, ang connotation is that it is slow but consistent. Incremental improvements in all areas of the operation. So the goal is to attain yung ideal standards even when your practical standards are already being met. So ang nasa core ng Kaizen is implementing ideal standards and quality improvement. But take note of the term continuous. So they are slow increments. So the Kaizen would challenge people to imagine yung ideal condition and to strive to make the necessary improvements para ma-meet yung ideals. Cost of quality. There are two main differences in the classifications of the cost of each quality, and that is cost of conformance and cost of non-conformance. Itong cost na to, they are further broken down into costs of quality. So tatanungin sa'yo yung two main cost classification, so the cost of conformance and non-conformance. Pag cost of conformance, you have your prevention cost, preventive in nature, your appraisal cost, under cost of non-conformance, whether it is internal or external. Kasi non-conformance, so hindi ka sumunod doon sa standard. And if it is a standard, is this the result of an internal or an external failure? So for purposes of your exams, ang itatanong sa'yo is to identify which activity is a non-conformance cost, a conformance cost, or is this a preventive cost, is this an appraisal cost? Ganun. Bibigyan ka niya ng example and then you have to identify anong klaseng cost. So these are the costs of making sure that a unit is produced properly and according to your requirements. So if it's a prevention cost, what we are trying to do, these costs are expended to prevent, because what we're trying to do is to prevent a defect from occurring. So for prevention cost, it would include your quality training and planning cost, equipment maintenance cost, supplier training and coordination cost, as well as information systems cost. Pag appraisal, you assess or you evaluate whether a unit is produced properly or not. So appraisal cost would include your cost of testing, your inspection, your quality audits, and internal quality programs. So any cost that any activity, it would include any activity that would involve evaluation or assessments of whether your production or your items would conform to your standards. Cost of non-conformance, these are the costs that are incurred after a defective unit has been produced. So the thing is, sa non-conformance cost, nagkakaroon ka lang ng non-conformance cost after your production. So nakapag-produce ka na, meron kang defective package. So these costs are further classified on who finds the defect. Is it the company or the customer? So internal failure costs, these are the cost of fixing the defect when the defect is discovered by the company. So ibig sabihin, pag tayo ang nakahanap, tayo yung producing company, we see your internal failure cost along the lines of rework, your scrap, your tooling and downtime, and expediting costs. However, it is classified as external failure cost when it is discovered by your customer, such as siya yung nakakita ng defect. So this is covered sometimes by your warranty cost, your product liability cost, and often kapag hindi nami-meet yung quality or quality requirement ng ating customer, nawawala yung kanilang loyalty or the goodwill to our company because of that defective product, and potentially also environmental costs. Yan. Opportunity cost of quality, these are large costs associated with not producing a product of quality. So ang sinasabi niya kasi dito, money and time must be spent fixing your initial product, and necessary and after sales not to fix yung defective products. And instead of being able to use sana those resources that are used in after sales to other more lucrative, or more contributing sa ating contribution margin sana the product, ginagamit natin siya instead to fix something that is defective. So normally, kapag nawawala yung quality or nag-veer away siya from the standard or the requirement of your buyer or your customer, nawawalan tayo ng goodwill. So lumilipat sila sa ibang companies who are able to fulfill yung kanilang standards. And with that, of course, by advertisement, kahit by word of mouth, these customers who have experienced itong mga defects na ito, they are less likely to recommend yung ating mga produkto to others. Quality of design would refer to how well a product or service would meet yung want and need of the customer. And so if there is a particular demand for a particular feature on the product or a particular service, and a manufacturer or service company is supplying its product without the feature, then meron kang problem kasi that is the basis for your product would be coming from your demand. So eventually kapag hindi mo na-meet yung demand ng market, then you expect that there's also low profitability. So when you do not provide what the customer wants and needs, then it is a quality of design failure. TQM, this is an approach is committed to, at the core, kanyang focus is your customer satisfaction and continuous improvement. Ang gustong mangyari ng TQM is a reduction of cost and improvement of quality. And so we want to enhance and provide goods and services that are of consistent quality. So we want these services and these products to be timely and consistent responses doon sa wants and needs of your customers. Part of your TQM is likewise elimination again of your non-value adding work or processes para mapababa mo ang cost. One of the goals of your TQM is also to respond or adapt, to be flexible doon sa shifting na preferences or requirements of your customers. Yan. The core principles of TQM, or these are sometimes called your critical factors. So they have the support and the active involvement of top management. They have clear and measurable objectives. They recognize quality achievements in a timely manner. They continuously provide training na doon sa ating TQM. So they strive for Kaizen, and we also highlight on satisfying yung demand ng ating customers, their demand, their expectations, their standards. And one of the critical factors would also include the involvement of your employees. So because they are directly involved in the provision of your services and goods. TQM is not a short-term project. This is long-term. This requires commitment from the top management. Actually, hindi lang siya sa top management, but from everybody in the organization. The implementation is all throughout the organization. So it tells you na the pursuit of your ideal or your targets would focus on continuing education. Thus, the focus on Kaizen. And so the employees, kaya niya sinabi na participation ng employees is they are regularly put into training or continuous education because the assumption is that when your employees are trained well and they know the nitty-gritty of what you do, of what you provide to your customers, it promotes a culture of excellence, of quality, which in turn redounds to the quality of the product or the service that your business would provide to the customer. So in PQM, the role of a quality manager is not limited to a special department. Everyone in the organization is responsible for finding and correcting any problems as soon as they can. So it establishes a culture of quality and excellence. Methods of analyzing quality problems, you could use your control charts, your histogram, and your Pareto diagrams. Now, they will only ask you this about the concept, perhaps a definition, but not really to give an example. That's not in your essay. And so I've not seen one yet asked na for you to make one yet. So for a control chart, this would simply record observations of an operation. It is taken at regular intervals, the purpose of which is to determine if these observations that you have recorded are within the relevant range or within a specific range or within the statistical control range, or if it is out of control, so you will be able to know if which part of your operations need improvement or which need focus. Histogram is the use of a bar graph. Yung bar graph mo, pinapakita niya sa iyo frequency of the events para ma-identify mo yung pattern or yung trend. Pareto diagram is the 20-80 rule. Sinasabi ng Pareto diagram, if you identify 20% of the causes of the issues or the problems, you are already solving 80% of your problems. 20% of the causes account for the 80% of the problem. So, ang magiging focus mo dapat is to identify ito, 20% na ito. Because it's already going to have to identify your own bulk issues. So, you have here your control chart, your control chart, your histogram, and your bar graph. Cause and effect or the Ishikawa diagram or yung fishbone, it organizes cause and effects visually to sort out. Ginagamit to sa root cause analysis and to identify relationships between causes. So ipapakita niya sa iyo yung main na factors which are people, the primary activities and the support activities. So you have your causes. You have identified that there's issues with people, with methods, with machines and materials, and all others. You have to identify kung ano yung cause ng failure sa kanila or cause ng issues sa kanila. And then in combination, your analysis again would include or could be a consolidation of your analysis of all of these issues. Kasi identify mo muna, like, ano yung problema natin sa people, what are the issues encountered with our methods, with our machines, and with our materials. Then you describe in detail what are the specific issues that we encounter with people, methods, and machines. And how are we going to resolve yung ating problem? What is the effect sa ating operations? So to identify root causes, to identify relationships between these causes para makita mo ang kanyang effect, which is in turn yung problem that you're trying to address. PQM and activity-based costing, again, your PQM is most compatible with your ABC system. Remember that for your ABC, it would identify your cost and activities and make the cost of quality. Diba? You have your poor quality. I-identify niya yung cost to correct poor quality or deficiencies. If an ABC system is in place, most of the cost information needed for TQM is already being captured. So a company that uses ABC will continuously identify non-value added activities because remember, the bases know your cost drivers. So it can identify immediately which of your activities would have to be reduced or eliminated by simply identifying that these activities are non-value adding and these are value adding. So again, it boils down to which activities are value adding. Quality management and productivity. Yeah. So while it may seem that producing a quality product is more difficult and time-consuming, many of our businesses focus on quality. That focus on quality are more productive than other companies. Kasi if you focus on the quality, we know well that we have low numbers of defective units. So kung mas mababa ang iyong defective na units, nare-reduce nito yung amount of time, the material, and effort that is wasted on defective or unusable products. Or kung defective siya, yung time or the resources that we would spend on fixing ang ating defective units. And quality management and productivity is assumed ng nagpa-practice nito has a more efficient manufacturing process. And companies who practice ito would commit to doing it right the first time. So again, a culture of excellence and quality. That is the end of your section D. Ayan. There was one person who asked last time how I presented. Kasi diba I mentioned na depende doon sa ating method ang pag-answer ng ating allocations. But this was the answer to the question yung kanyang T-account. If I place it on the end of the slide, it's an answer to that. So if you look at this, meron tayong tatlong T-accounts. You have one for raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. So it's going to show you the flow of the goods. So for the raw materials inventory, usual, because of the normal balance na debit, yung beginning balance mo ay nasa debit. So the balances, your purchase, direct and indirect materials will be on the left side or on the debit side. And reduce this by your ending balance, makukuha mo yung materials used in the manufacturing process. Itong materials used in the manufacturing process ay pumapasok sa iyong work in process inventory. Pumapasok siya sa work in process inventory mo as the direct materials that are used in your production. So you add this to your labor and factory overhead, then you have your total manufacturing cost. So this becomes your total manufacturing cost. When you add this to your beginning balance, you have your and reduced by the ending balance, you have your cost of goods manufactured. So ang flow ng cost of goods manufactured from the work in process, pupunta naman siya as an addition to your finished goods inventory. This is your cost of goods manufactured. Added to your beginning balance, reduced by your ending balance, makikita mo yung cost of goods sold. So yung flow niya from raw materials, direct material used, to work in process inventory. Work in process inventory, lalabas siya in the form of cost of goods manufactured to your finished goods and finally to the cost of goods sold. This is the way that I do my analysis also with the relationships, like what if you have a low amount of purchase in your materials, what happens to the ending working process, or what happens to the beginning ending working process. Sometimes the question would go as far as what is the effect of the low beginning balance of working process to cost of goods sold and cost of goods manufactured. So essentially, pag ginagamit ko ito, gumagamit lang ako ng arrows para makita yung kanilang increases or decreases as representing and arrows as representation for any increases or decreases para mas madali yung binigay na situation. Ayan. That is the end of the slide. So I would like to, there's two of you, I'd like to move on to your multiple choice questions. No, but before we do that, it's 7:45 my time. I think we need to go on a bio break. So let's be back after 10 minutes and then we are going to continue with your multiple choice question. Please come back at 7:55. 7:55.